Perfect. Thank you. It's time for our next speaker. I appreciate you guys' patience again. Our next speaker is Professor Mark. Welcome, Professor Mark. Um, Professor Mark is actually a head of the Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communication at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He is going to present about the leadership programming experience of the department actually engaging international students in tips of success for mainly international students. This distinguished professor has been enormously supporting international students, including Ethiopians. Uh, Professor Mark, it is a pleasure to have you here. You can go ahead and present. You do have 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, we can hear you.
Very good. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you today. And I want to thank Fikadu for the invitation to be a part of this group. And my task is to take the next 7 minutes and really talk about graduate education, higher education here in the United States in terms of what are some strategies to be successful in getting admitted into master's or PhD programs. And so as I was introduced, I do lead a department that has graduate degrees in leadership and in education and in communication. And those are different than you might think. This has nothing to do with politics or getting into a life of a political job, but has everything to do with working in communities and helping to build the lives of others. In fact, our tagline in our department is developing human potential. And so the graduate degrees that we have can be applied across a wide variety of industries and professions. And again, it has absolutely nothing to do with politics. If you recognize that a leader is someone who has trained or become educated in how to be effective in interpersonal skills, small groups, or large organizations, we believe that leadership is something that can be learned, it can be taught, and it's not something that you are born with or ordained a leader. It has nothing to do with title, has everything to do with influence. And so that's where our programs really focus. But let me talk just a little bit about, there's really a couple of things to think about in terms of what it takes to be successful in getting admission into an institution of higher education. And the two aspects that I want to focus my time on are really number one, about getting admitted to a program. And the second one is obtaining funding to study in the form of an assistantship. Getting admitted to a program is really all about the relationship that you have with that institution and with individuals at that institution, as well as alignment with your goals, your interests, your passions, with what that program or those individuals do. And I look at it like anything else. If you were to apply for a job, the job that you would be most suited for would be the job that is looking for someone who has the skill sets that you have. And the closer you can align with those skill sets, the greater the opportunity you'll have to get that job. Whether you're applying for a grant, whether you are applying for admission to a university or applying to a job, it's all about how well do you align with what they're interested in. And so that's number one. It has to be a program that specializes in the area that you're interested in. And to do that takes a lot of investigation, a lot of work on the internet to find programs and places that align with what you're passionate about. And by that, I mean, you need to identify faculty whose priorities are the same things that you're passionate about. We get a lot of applications. We get hundreds of emails of people, and it looks like they're just sending it out to dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of places, seeing if anyone will accept them. That's not the approach that I'm talking about. Those are not emails that have any chance really of being successful. It's the individual that sends a personalized email introducing themselves and asking, this is what I see you're interested in. This is also something that I'm interested in. Are there opportunities for me to study there? And are there opportunities for funding? That's a really critical step in all of this, is to identify the programs and the faculty that align with your interests. And I really want to emphasize the need to establish relationship with individuals at these institutions. And I realize you say, well, that may be difficult to do because I'm on the other side of the world, but I'm not talking about just sending one email. If you find someone who's very interested about the things that you're interested in, and it seems like they're studying and investigating and researching that area, they're actively publishing in that area, then an initial email is great, but then follow up with that. And if that person is interested, then it can go to a phone call, it can go to a Zoom call, but really beginning to identify people and trying to initiate a relationship. Having looked at someone's website, finding a faculty member who is interested in what you're interested in, and then sending in an application doesn't usually bring success from my experience. It takes somebody on faculty who says, yes, I know that person. I've interacted with that person. I met them at a conference, or I had a Zoom call with them. We've been emailing back and forth for months. Yes, I know this person, and I'm interested in bringing them in as a graduate student and interested in giving them funding. That's really what we're looking for. In other words, when those faculty are considering admitting potential graduate students or providing funding for potential graduate students, it's all about relationship. And so that's really, really critical. Then when it comes to application, I think it's important to make sure that you recognize all the pieces that are necessary in a graduate application. Many places will require the GRE, or the graduate record exam, and that you have taken it within a fairly recent period of time. In our program, we require that the GRE scores be within the last 5 years, I believe it is. And so recognizing that that takes time to schedule taking the exam, it takes time for the processing of your scores, and then it also takes time to have those scores sent to the institution you're interested in, is enough time that you have to be thinking and planning well ahead. And then recognize what are the other components of an application and make sure that you give yourself the best opportunity to present your best work. So a lot of times there will be an application, online application. There will be opportunity to submit transcripts from the institutions you've studied at. There will also be an opportunity for people to write letters of recommendation, serve as reference for you. And then many times it will also require some type of writing sample. Maybe it's a copy of some writing you've done in the past. Maybe it's answering questions in an essay form. Maybe it's both of those. But it's really critical that your application be put together as neatly and as accurately as possible. In other words, having no spelling errors, having no grammar errors, not leaving anything blank. One of the things that we see from quite often is people asking others to write letters of recommendation for them, and they use that same letter in various applications. And I realize that if you're applying to many different places, it can be efficient to use the same letters. But one of the surest ways to eliminate an application is when we see a letter of recommendation that misstates the institution they're applying for, or it misstates the program they're applying for, or if it includes names of faculty that aren't even in that department. In other words, the person applying was too quick to submit the letters of recommendation and didn't take the time to realize that the name of the institution wasn't correct, the name of the program or the degree wasn't correct, and that's really, really important. That will eliminate an application right away. And you may have spent 20 hours pulling together all the pieces. You may have spent the money to take the GRE exam, but if a letter of recommendation that's misstated could throw it out. And the last thing I'll talk about very quickly as my time wraps up is thinking about the funding to study. And I realize that no one can afford to be in a PhD program that doesn't pay them an assistantship. And so it's important to recognize how much the assistantship is for. And what I recommend is that because the expenses for international students can be higher than the expenses for domestic students, it's important for you to recognize what the cost of living is for where that university is located. For instance, I'm not pleased to say the level of assistantship that we provide does not adequately provide for an international PhD student, even though it seems like a lot of money. So we pay about $20,000 US per year for a PhD student. And I know that seems like an enormous amount of money, but I'm here to tell you that $20,000 in Lincoln, Nebraska, where our university is located, is not enough for you to survive well while you're working on your PhD. And Fakadu can testify to this, that there are places that provide far more money, far greater money for you to study. And I would really encourage you to think hard about whether or not you can afford to live, because $20,000 in Lincoln, Nebraska is not enough for an international student to meet all of their needs. And I'm embarrassed to say that that's how little we provide, and I wish we could provide more, but we don't have the same resource base as many other institutions have. And so that's something I think that's very, very critical to think about. If you come here with a family, that's an even greater financial pressure on the limited amount of resources that we have. And so even though you might think, if I got admitted and someone's giving me an assistantship, that's a great thing, I'll figure it out. You really want to make sure that you've thought through all of the finances before you say yes and pursue this, because it may not be as lucrative as you think it is. And so with that, I know those are some very big topics that we talked about, but I want to make sure that we have time for questions and answers too.
Appreciate it, Professor. Thank you so much for your time again and for such a wonderful presentation. I'm pretty sure a lot of us are taking notes and getting such a golden advice series, because that means a lot. Any questions from the audience? I'll go ahead and read from the chat box, but if anybody would like to raise his or her hands, that'd be perfect. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and read the questions in the chat box. Okay. Well, so, gosh. Give me 1 second, please. It's a little. Oh,
Are you still there?
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you, Professor Mark. I'm a witness of all the support being provided, and the name of the Ethiopian youth, in the name of Yes Ethiopia, I really would like to acknowledge and witness the amount of guidance and support I'm getting from the Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education and Communication. And I can boldly say that really this is a very great place to learn about ways to develop human potentials. The name and really the services go together. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the support you are providing to me. You are also serving the Ethiopian youth. You are serving Yes Ethiopia. So thank you.
Thank you, Fikadu. You are a tremendous ambassador for Ethiopia, and you align with our department's core values of excellence very, very well. And it's a pleasure having you in our department.
Wonderful. I think Tizit has got technical problems, so I'll jump in until she comes in. So absolutely great points raised by Professor Balschweid. I hope everybody was taking notes, and we'll share some of those as well in our chats. So I am a testament to I came to the United States as a PhD student to the University of South Carolina in 2010 is when I joined, and at that time I had a few phone conversations from Ethiopia
everyone.
with the department chair, and also with the graduate admission person at the University of South Carolina. So creating relationships, and I did not realize how selective the programs are when I was applying from Ethiopia. And after coming here through conversation, I was one of the 8 students that came into that department for that year, but that's 8 students joining out of hundreds of applications. So that's something that, you pointed out really well, that creating relationships, talking to the department chair, reading a paper and trying to understand that paper and talking about those papers. And those are really important, and communication skills. So really, really thank you for your time and for really excellent tips.
I appreciate those comments because you give a testimony, I think, to how important that is. And every one of us, if I'm applying to a grant, I want to call the program officer who is administering that grant, and I want to get as much information from them as I possibly can. I want their suggestions for what can they tell me to help make my proposal as strong as possible. What are the things that they prioritize that maybe wasn't listed in the call for proposals? What are the tips that they would suggest that reviewers are looking for? So I'm not necessarily seeking an unfair advantage, but I am recognizing that relationship is important, and that once you have that relationship established, what I hate to see, what saddens me, is an applicant to a graduate program who spends an enormous amount of time on their application and a very, very limited amount of time on making a connection with that department. They go maybe to a website, find an email link that they cut and paste, and they spend about 15 seconds with a form email and consider that to be the connection that they made is satisfactory. And it's sad because none of us like to waste our time. But if you're going to spend 20 hours, for instance, on your application, surely a few hours spent trying to create a relationship through conversation and dialogue is time well spent, time well invested.
Thank you. Back to you, Zita. I think you've come in.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Professor, and thank you so much, Dr. Barakat. For some reason, I got kicked out of the meeting, which is really an awesome internet. Thank you so much for understanding. Well, I can't be able to access any of the questions in the chat box for some reason. So if
I'll read them.
if
I'll read
you
a
don't mind,
couple
I
of them, maybe
appreciate it. Thank you.
one or two if you have the time. So one of the questions I'm gonna pick a few
I think
because
one.
there's quite a lot of questions, but one of the questions is it talks about publications, requirement of publications for admission to graduate school. Is there a publication requirement? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I realize that I'm representing all fields, all disciplines, all institutions of higher education, and every one of them is very, very, very different. And I think the best advice that I could give in answering this question is that there's no one size that fits all. And by establishing that relationship, establishing a contact at an institution, you can begin to ask those questions and you can begin to get that inside information that specific questions can get answered, because it's impossible to try and collapse all of the disciplines of medicine and engineering and business and economics into this is the one thing that you should do. It really comes down to the specific discipline, the profession, the industry, the specific institution, and that particular college. And it's impossible to know what that is unless you're willing to invest the time in reaching out to someone and beginning to ask those questions specifically. Because, here's what happens at our institution. We pull all of the applications from the web. We bring them down. We give those out to the committee, and then there is a meeting date. And we sit in a room, and all of the faculty are around the table, and we go one by one through all of the applications. And we ask, does anyone know this individual? Has anyone talked with this individual? And it makes all the difference when a faculty member will say, yes, I have spoken to Fakadu. We have been emailing for the last several months. We've been working on a project together, or we had a Zoom conversation. And if multiple faculty are able to provide that testimonial, that's even better. But when no one around the table has ever spoken to or has ever heard from that particular applicant, there's very, very little chance that they'll get considered.
Perfect. So by creating a relationship, talking to someone in the department, someone is essentially creating a voice in the room for themselves, and that's
a great way to put it.
Yeah, so that's very, very important. Last question: what are you looking for in recommendation letters? So like, what are your expectations of a good recommendation letter?
That's a great question. I know it's difficult when you're applying to many different institutions to expect the letters that are written on your behalf to be tailored to that specific institution or that specific program. But I believe the ones that can be the most specific and the most personal are the best. And so if you have a relationship with a person who's writing letters of recommendation, it's good to have a paragraph that lists your educational abilities. In other words, it's important for that person to speak to your ability to succeed in school. I think being well-rounded is also important, to be able to show what sort of experiences, whether that's job experiences, community experiences, volunteering, that's important. But if that person writing the letter can say, this student will succeed at your university, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and will thrive in the leadership PhD because that's a passion of theirs. And if they can work with this individual and specifically name them, that's a powerful letter of recommendation. And I realize not everyone has the time to write those kinds of letters, but those are the pieces that I think are very important. The ones that I would say that aren't successful are the letters that don't speak to the student's ability to be academically successful. And not to be rude, but many times we'll see letters that talk about the personality of the individual. They're such a nice person. They're very kind. And although that's important, that doesn't help make decisions about whether or not they will be successful in the degree program, because at the end of the day, no one wants to fail in a graduate degree program, and no one wants to have to leave without having achieved what they came there for. No one wants to kick out someone because they haven't been able to academically succeed. And so really it's all about the academics, and it's all about the work ethic of that individual, and for them to be a contributor to the department, to the program, and so forth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. I really appreciate your explanation and elaboration about, the process and what we have to look in, what are the things that we have to consider when it comes to, approaching a graduate school. Absolutely crucial. I think we gotta take notes. That actually works to, it's just a similar approach with job search. That's what we experience in here too. So please take a note. That's a really great explanation and elaboration, and it's really insightful. Thank you so much, Professor. Attendees, I really apologize. We're really running out of time, so I gotta cut here. However, for a question that is raised by Andersa, we can answer that. Fike, if you don't mind to put your YessEthiopia email address so that she can join us. Again, for Sultan, I really apologize again. We have to move forward. Sorry. I know we would love to hear more from Professor. However, unfortunately, we're really constrained in time. So thank you so much again. I believe we can also answer your question, Sultan, if you don't mind to email us. Fike is gonna put in, his email address down there.